Good afternoon, my name is Adam Rosansky, and today I'll be talking to you about the financial decisions regarding water pricing and distribution. One of the first things we should talk about is this idea that water is a natural resource. A lot of people like to compare it to another natural resource like oil, but it's completely different in the sense that oil, once it's been used, you have to retake it from the ground. One of the ideas about water is this idea that water, in particularly, can be reused, reduced, and recycled. So it's kind of an interesting kind of component about how we can make money off of oil, but can we really make money off of water? To really understand this, it's important to understand the supply and demand chain. When it comes to the supply, there's two different types. There's physical and there's commercial. Physical being a transport or some type of the ability for someone to be able to contain it, like a reservoir or something like that. The commercial is the people who are regulating it, for example, the governmental officials. I like to think of it as an analogy of a pail of water, someone holding a pail of water. The person holding it is the commercial, the pail of water is the physical. Here's a good example of how the law of supply, which is a basic understanding of economic needs, as the quantity increases, the price increases. Simple idea. Where contradictory to that, when we talk about the demand, when the quantity increases, the price decreases. So this idea for demand is a good example of it. Is when we think of Halloween candy, is that the day after Halloween, people there's a large amount of candy, but there's such a low demand that the price goes down. And so then we can really talk about, once we talk about the law of supply and the law of demand, demand really kind of talks about this idea of being inelastic and elastic. Example. So when it comes to inelasticity, a good example of that is something that is you want that has a price on it. That doesn't matter how much it varies, people will still buy it. A good example of this is kind of like bottled water. And that's why up here is that drinking water is such a higher, more elastic, because it's more vertical than, let's say, gardening water, because that's more of elastic or it's horizontal. And so this is a really good explanation about how the water industry works and how people actually don't always realize that the water coming out of their faucet is the same exact water that you're throwing on your lawn. And so this is it's interesting. How do you price water? Mostly water is priced according to state legislators. Basically the idea of how supply and demand intersect, that's how you be able to come to a price floor or a market price, for example. And here's where it gets more interesting, is that, well, what happens when people aren't using water enough? How are you going to be able to get, for example, your legislator, how are you going to be able to pay for all these bills and so on and so forth? Here's a good understanding. Here's a good graph. Milwaukee's a good example of this. People, as you can see, don't use that much water in the green, but as a result, it's so much, they don't put enough price into it. So one of the ideas that people have been putting in is that, why don't we raise up the prices? Well, that just makes all this a lot more confusing, because how do you put a price on water that we've come to decide that can be an issue? So here's what the idea is. If cities are starting to not see their ability of gaining popularity in water, and people aren't actually going to be using it as much, this idea of privatization comes into hand. So this is what's interesting. Can it be profitable? Yes, if you put it into a privatization, a profitable sector. But there's a huge problem with that. For example, this idea of human rights. As cities go into bankruptcy, this is where it really comes to be an issue, is that people start talking about privatization. So in conclusion, water is a human resource. It's a human right. Cities who are going bankrupt try to do this privatization thing, but it doesn't always work. And what ends up happening is there's horrible, horrible consequences where a lot of people are really upset. And actually, in general, it actually hurts the economy, which I really talk in my paper. Here are my references I took. I'm sorry I kind of sped through that, but I think it's a really point to take part in. Thank you.